The security guard's hand on my elbow was surprisingly gentle, but it was still the most humiliating moment of my entire life. His name was Frank. I knew this because for the past 7 years, I had said good morning, Frank, and good night. Frank almost every single day. I knew he had a daughter starting college in the fall. I knew he liked the Chicago Bears. And now, Frank, his face a perfect mask of professional pity, was escorting me, Elena Vance, out of the marble lobby of Aethelred and Thorne, the most prestigious architecture firm in the city. My personal belongings were in a pathetic, small cardboard box clutched in my other hand, a coffee mug with a chipped rim, a framed photo of my graduation, a worn-out copy of The 7 Lamps of Architecture. 10 minutes earlier, I had been the lead designer, the sole designer on the most important project in the firm's history. 10 minutes earlier, my boss, Mark Thorne, had called me into his glass-walled corner office. His voice was smooth, like expensive whiskey, the voice he always used on high-value clients. "Elena," he said, not meeting my eyes, focusing instead on straightening an already perfect silver pen on his desk. "We're letting you go." I remember the silence, the sound of the traffic on Michigan Avenue, 50 floors below, seemed to get louder, rushing in to fill the vacuum. "What?" "We're downsizing," he lied, "restructuring, and given the sensitive nature of the Futura Museum project, we've decided to move in a different direction. Your services are no longer required." The Futura project, my design, my masterpiece, the project I had bled for, slept in the office for, the project I had sacrificed 2 full years of my life to create. He had fired me. He had fired me exactly 24 hours before the final, career-defining presentation to the anonymous, legendary billionaire client. He had fired me so he could stand up tomorrow, in front of the client and the entire city review board, and present my work, my soul, as his own. I looked at him. The man in the $5,000 custom suit. The man whose name was on the letterhead only because his father had built the firm. Not him. He was holding a presentation binder. My binder. My renders. My calculations. "Mark," I whispered, the shock making my voice shake. "You can't. The presentation. The client." "I'll handle the presentation," he said, his eyes finally meeting mine. They were cold, empty. "It's best this way. A clean break." And that was it. Security was called. My network access was cut before I even made it back to my desk. As Frank guided me toward the gleaming revolving doors, I looked back. Mark was watching me from his office. A tiny, triumphant silhouette against the massive Chicago skyline. He thought he had won. He thought he had cut me out, erased me, and stolen my future. He didn't know that I had been planning for this exact day for 6 months. He didn't know that firing me wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of his. Mark Thorne thought he was holding my masterpiece, but what he was really holding was a bomb, and I was the only one in the world who knew how to defuse it. He thought I was broken, but as I stepped out onto the cold, windy sidewalk, I wasn't crying. I was counting down the hours. To understand what happened, you have to understand Mark Thorne. Mark is the thorn in Aethelred, and Thorne, his father. Arthur Thorne. It was a true genius, a visionary who built the firm on principles of integrity and bold, brutalist design. Mark inherited the name, the corner office, and the clients. But he inherited absolutely none of the talent. Mark is a salesman. He speaks in soothing, empty corporate buzzwords. He can charm a city council. He can flatter a zoning board. But he cannot design a building. He hasn't opened a CAD computer-aided design file in at least a decade. And then there was me, Elena Vance, the scholarship kid from Gary, Indiana, who clawed her way into the best architecture school, graduated top of my class, and naively believed that hard work and talent were enough. For 7 years, I was Mark's secret weapon. I was the in-house visionary. I was the one pulling all-nighters, translating his vague napkin sketches. I want it to feel transparent, but also strong, like a crystal into award-winning structures. I did the work. He took the credit. At first, I told myself it was paying my dues. This is how the industry works. I was young. I needed the experience. I needed the prestigious name Ethelred and Thorne on my resume. You're my star, Elena, he'd say, patting my shoulder before walking into a boardroom to present my designs, my renders, my words. As his solo vision, the first major crack appeared 3 years ago. The Redwood Tower condos. It was my concept, my innovative split-level layout, my sustainable energy model. At the final client dinner, Mark presented it all himself. He introduced me to the client, a man who was praising my design as his senior assistant, not lead designer, not architect, assistant. The loyalty died that night. The naive belief that my talent would be enough. It shattered. Then, 2 years ago, the brief landed. It was the project of a lifetime, an anonymous philanthropist, rumored to be a reclusive, eccentric tech billionaire, wanted to build a new museum, the Futura Museum. The budget was listed simply as unlimited. The goal: build the impossible. Design a structure that doesn't just hold the future, but is the future. This wasn't just a building. It was my calling. I poured my entire soul into it. I designed a structure that breathed. It was a massive, cantilevered wing of glass and biocomposite steel that soared out over the Chicago River, seeming to float. I called it the Phoenix Wing. The entire facade was covered in kinetic panels that harnessed energy from the wind and the vibrations of the city, making the building itself a living power source. It was bold, it was beautiful, and it was incredibly, terrifyingly complex. Mark loved it. He loved the look of it. He loved the shiny renders. I remember one night, about 8 months ago, I was finalizing the structural integrity models. I had been working for 36 hours straight, running wind load simulations until my eyes burned. Mark came in, smelling of expensive cologne and scotch. He looked at my screen, which was filled with complex differential equations and finite element analysis. "Looks great, Elena," he said, pointing at a shiny render. "Just make sure the lobby is bigger. The client will love a big lobby." That was the moment I knew. He didn't understand the work. Not a single line of it. He didn't understand why it worked. Only that it looked good. He didn't understand that the lobby's current size was integral to the load-bearing core that held up the entire wing. I knew, deep in my gut, that if I created the Futura Museum, he wouldn't just take credit. He would take everything. He would erase me. So, that night, 6 months ago, I went back to the office. I opened the master file for the Futura Museum, and I started to build my trap. My plan was simple, but it had to be flawless. I created 2 complete versions of the Futura Museum. I called them the Decoy and the True Futura. The Decoy lived on the Ethelred and Thorne Company servers. It was the version Mark had full access to. It was 99% identical to my real design. The renders were spectacular. The floor plans were functional. It looked like a $1 billion masterpiece. But it had a flaw. A fatal, structural flaw, buried so deep in the advanced technical calculations that no one would ever find it unless they were. Well, unless they were the actual architect. The Phoenix Wing, that massive, beautiful cantilever that floated over the river was held up by a series of post-tensioned steel supports. In the decoy, I altered the calculations for the load-bearing capacity. I changed the math. I reduced the tensile strength requirement by just 3%. On paper, in the sleek presentation deck, it looked perfect. But in a real-world structural engineering review, in the brutal 70-mile-per-hour shear winds that blast Chicago in the winter, the wing would collapse. It was a catastrophic, career-ending, firm-destroying mistake. A mistake only the true architect could spot and fix. The second version, the true Futura, was my real design. The math was solid. The structure was sound. It was sustainable, efficient, and, I believed, a work of art. This version existed on only one device, an encrypted, air-gapped hard drive that I kept in a fireproof safe in my apartment. For the next 6 months, I lived a double life. By day, I was Mark's dutiful star. He became overly collaborative, which was his first mistake. "Elena, let's review our progress," he'd say. He asked for all my files, all my server passwords, just for backup. He was slowly, methodically building his case, gathering my work so he could present it as his own. I gave him everything. I uploaded every new render, every flawed calculation of the decoy, right onto the server for him. I even stayed late with him, explaining the vision behind the kinetic panels and the shiny lobby, watching him nod and pretend to understand. I was feeding the beast, and he was getting fatter and more confident every single day. The pressure was immense. The anonymous client communicated only through a high-powered law firm. Harding, Lee. The deadline for the final presentation was set for October 15th. Then, I took the biggest risk of my life. I used a burner email and a public computer at the Harold Washington Library. I sent a message to the lead attorney at Harding and Lee. The email read, "My name is Elena Vance. I am the sole architect of the Futura Museum project at Ethelred and Thorne. I have reason to believe my intellectual property is at risk of being stolen by my employer, Mark Thorne, who intends to present my work as his own. I have created a contingency. I do not ask for intervention. I only ask for one thing, a seat at the final presentation, not as a presenter, but as an observer. The real design is safe." I didn't know if they would believe me. I didn't know if they would even read it. It was a shot in the dark. 3 days later, a cryptic reply came. "Your request is noted. An invitation will be sent to your personal address. We trust you will handle this with discretion." A week later, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived at my apartment. It had no return address. Inside was a single, heavy stock card, granting Ms. Com, Elena Vance, access to the final presentation. I hid it in my safe, right next to the hard drive. Then, the inevitable came. Mark called me in. The day before the presentation. "Elena," he said, practicing his somber. "This is hard for me too. Look, I think it's best if I handle the final presentation alone. It's a relationships thing. The client is very particular. You understand." I played my part. I looked disappointed, but understanding. Of course. "Mark, whatever is best for the firm." He smiled, relieved at how easy it was. The next morning, he fired me. He had security waiting. He thought he had cut me off completely, securing his victory. As I stood on that sidewalk, clutching my box, I felt a single, cold thrill of adrenaline. He hadn't just fired me. He had liberated me. The presentation was held in the grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel. This wasn't a simple boardroom meeting. The client had flown in a panel of the world's most ruthless architectural critics, urban planners, and structural engineers. The room was packed with city officials and Chicago's cultural elite. I arrived, wearing the best suit I owned, a simple, sharp, black pantsuit I had saved for 3 months to buy. I walked past the velvet ropes to the check-in desk. "Elena Vance," I said, my voice steady. The woman checked her list. Yes, Ms. Vance. You are a guest of the client. Please, go right in." Mark was already inside. Schmutzing. He was electric. The center of attention. Shaking hands. Laughing his big, fake laugh. When he saw me walk in, his smile froze. He went pale. He quickly crossed the room, grabbing my arm. "What are you doing here?" he hissed. His voice a tight whisper of panic. "You were fired. You're trespassing." I pulled my arm away and held up my invitation. "I'm a guest." "Mark," I said, smiling sweetly. "A guest of the client. Just here to watch the show. Break a leg." His face went from pale to a sickly shade of green. He knew something was wrong, but he couldn't figure out what. The music quieted. The presentation was starting. He had no choice but to take the stage. For the first 20 minutes, he was brilliant. I had to give him that. He was a performer. He clicked through the renders, my decoy renders. The audience was captivated. The phoenix wing soaring over the river drew an audible gasp from the crowd. Mark was magnetic. He talked about my vision. He talked about my inspiration. How he dreamt of this building after a solitary walk along the river. He was selling the lie of his life. And they were buying every single word. He finished to thunderous applause. He stood there, soaking it in, bowing slightly. Then, the Q&A began. A woman at the front of the panel stood up. She was older, with sharp gray hair and even sharper eyes. I knew who she was instantly. Dr. Evelyn Reed, a living legend in structural engineering. She wrote the textbook I used in college. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice cutting through the applause. "Impressive visuals. Truly. Let's talk specifics." Mark's smile tightened. "Your phoenix wing cantilever," Dr. Reed continued, "is extraordinarily ambitious. It extends over 250 feet, with minimal visible support. Can you walk us through your wind load mitigation strategy? Specifically, your calculations for the oscillation dampening in a 70-mile-per-hour shear wind." This was it. The fatal flaw. Mark froze. His eyes darted around, looking for a teleprompter that wasn't there. The dampening," he stammered, "is state-of-the-art. Our team, my team, use the most advanced modeling." "Doctor," Reed cut him off, her voice like ice. "Your team, I am asking you." "Mr. Thorne, as the architect, the calculations in this file," she held up a tablet, displaying my decoy calculations, "show a fundamental misunderstanding of post-tension steel. According to your math, this wing wouldn't just oscillate, it would resonate. And it would collapse, likely in its first Chicago winter." The room went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Mark was sweating. Visibly, his $5,000 suit suddenly looked cheap. He started shuffling his papers. "There must be a mistake. A file mix-up. My assistant." Another panelist jumped in. "On that note, Mr. Thorne, the kinetic paneling. Your report claims it can power 80% of the building's needs. But how do you intend to maintain that efficiency with the variable foot traffic data from the Riverwalk? Cross-referenced with the seasonal wind speed drop in late summer." Mark had no idea. He didn't know what a kinetic panel was. He just knew it sounded good. That's a proprietary algorithm," he pleaded. "It's not," a third panelist said. It's basic engineering. You don't have the answer. Do you? Mark was exposed. He was a fraud. And everyone in that room knew it. His eyes, wild with panic, scanned the crowd and found me. I was just sitting in the third row, watching. His face contorted with rage. He had finally figured it out. He lifted a shaking finger and pointed it at me. Her, he shouted, his voice cracking. It was her. That's Elena Vance, a disgruntled ex-employee. I fired her. She sabotaged the files. She's a criminal. Every head in the ballroom swiveled to look at me. The security guards tensed. Moving toward the aisle. Mark was breathing heavily, his face a blotchy. Furious red. Arrest her. She sabotaged my presentation. I stood up, smoothing my suit jacket. I felt perfectly, terrifyingly calm. He's half right, I said, my voice carrying easily in the silence. My name is Elena Vance. I was fired yesterday. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. I was fired. I continued, so that Mr. Thorne could present my work as his own. But he is not the architect of the Futura Museum. I am. The room erupted in whispers. Mark started shouting again. She's lying. She's insane. Then, a new voice cut through the chaos. It was quiet, but it had an authority that silenced everyone. Even Mark. Please. Ms. Vance. We've been waiting for you. A man stepped out from the shadows at the side of the stage. He wasn't in a suit. He wore a simple tweed jacket, corduroy pants, and worn-out sneakers. He looked like a college professor. He walked to the center of the stage and addressed the panel. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Dr. Reed. Your analysis was, as always, flawless. That design is indeed non-viable. It is a $1 billion death trap. He turned to Mark, who looked like he'd seen a ghost. Mr. Thorne, the man said. Thank you for presenting the decoy. Mark's jaw dropped. The decoy. The man in the tweed jacket turned and smiled at me. It was a kind, familiar smile. My heart stopped. I knew that smile. Professor Caldwell, I whispered. Professor Julian Caldwell. He was my thesis advisor at university. The one who told me I had the gift. The one who pushed me, challenged me, and told me to never, ever compromise on my vision. I thought he had retired to Vermont. He turned to the stunned audience. Good morning. My name is Julian Caldwell. I am your anonymous client. The room imploded. Julian Caldwell wasn't just a retired professor. He was the reclusive founder of Aperture Dynamics, one of the biggest tech companies in the world. He was a legend. Julian raised his hand for silence. I created this competition to find true vision, not slick salesmanship. When my legal team at Harding and Lee received Ms. Purser Vance's discreet email 6 months ago, I was intrigued. He looked at me. I knew your work. Elena, I always believed in you. And, he said, turning back to Mark, I knew the reputation of Mr. Thorne. I knew his father. And I know him. So, we let this play out. Julian explained. We analyzed the files Mr. Thorne had on his server, the decoy. And then, we analyzed the true design. The one Mr. Vance delivered directly to my team last week. He gestured to the main screen. Mark's flawed renders vanished. And then, my design appeared. The true Futura. The screen filled with the real math. The sound structural models. The beautiful, strong, sustainable building. I had designed this, Julian said, his voice filling with passion, is the Futura Museum, structurally ingenious, perfectly balanced. and truly visionary. This is the building I will fund. He looked at Mark, whose face was the color of ash. Mr. Thorne, Ethelred and Thorne will be compensated for its time, as per the contract, but your services and your firms are no longer required. I believe my legal team will be in touch with you regarding the attempted intellectual property theft and fraud. Mark didn't speak. He just slumped, a puppet with its strings cut. He was escorted out of the ballroom by the same security guards who were about to arrest me. Julian Caldwell, the billionaire I hadn't seen in 10 years, walked over to me. He had tears in his eyes. Ms. Vance, he said formally, though his eyes were twinkling. The commission is yours, if you'll have it. I didn't just accept the commission, I accepted the challenge. The aftermath was swift. The story exploded. The decoy architect. The headlines called me. Mark Thorne was ruined. The Thorne name became toxic. He was disbarred from the American Institute of Architects for ethics violations. Ethelred and Thorne, the firm his father had built, collapsed under the weight of lawsuits and scandal within 6 months. It was dissolved. Its assets sold for pennies on the dollar. He lost everything. All because his ego was bigger than his talent. He couldn't stand to see someone else shine. And me? I didn't take the project back to another big firm. I founded my own. I called it Vance Caldwell Design. Julian Professor Caldwell insisted on being a silent partner, funding my launch. You need your own name on the door. Elena, he said. This is your vision. The next 2 years were the hardest and most rewarding of my life. We didn't just build the museum. We perfected it. We worked with Dr. Reed on the engineering. We sourced sustainable materials from all over the world. We built the true Futura. I remember standing on the Phoenix Wing on opening day. It was a cold, bright Chicago morning. I could feel the slight, correct vibration of the wing under my feet as hundreds of people walked across its kinetic floor, their footsteps powering the lights inside. Julian stood next to me, holding a cup of coffee. He wasn't wearing tweed. I had finally gotten him into a decent coat. It's exactly as you dreamt it. Elena, he said. No, it's better. I did see Mark one last time. It was about a year after the opening. I was at a hardware superstore on the weekend, picking up some materials for a small pro bono project I was designing for a community center in my old neighborhood. He was in the lumber aisle, wearing a polo shirt with a logo for a cheap, modular home company. He was a consultant. He saw me, and for a second, his eyes flashed with that old, familiar hatred. Then, it was just gone. He looked tired. He looked broken. He turned and walked away without a word. The fire was gone. He had nothing left to steal. People will always try to steal your light. They will mistake your hard work for their own good fortune. They will see your talent as a resource to be mined, not a gift to be respected. My story isn't about revenge. It's about insurance. I learned that loyalty is a currency, and you must be careful who you spend it on. I learned that you should always keep a backup. Mark Thorne tried to steal my design, but he could never steal my mind. He could take the blueprints, but not the vision. A salesman can sell an idea, but only an architect, only the creator, knows where the load-bearing walls are. And in the end, that's the only thing that matters. My name is Elena Vance, and I built the future, my future.